welcome you watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. We have a packed Friday edition for you with all the top global stories. Let's get started. By now we know that large swaths of the besieged Gaza Strip have been left in ruins by relentless Israeli bombing coupled with ground assaults during the last 4 months since the Israel-Hamas war erupted on the 7th of October. But now a New York Times investigation has revealed and detailed how controlled explosions being carried out by the Israeli forces are razing to the ground entire neighbourhoods and in the process altering beyond recognition the landscape of the embattled enclave. Homes, schools, markets, hotels, courthouses, any and all infrastructure obliterated in seconds with the pull of a trigger. At least 33 controlled demolitions have destroyed hundreds of buildings, including mosques, schools, and entire sections of residential neighborhoods since November. That's what a New York Times analysis of Israeli military footage, social media videos, and satellite imagery shows. In response to questions about these demolitions, a spokesperson for the Israeli military said, "Soldiers are locating and destroying terror infrastructures embedded, amongst other things, inside buildings in civilian areas, and that sometimes entire neighborhoods act as combat complexes for Hamas fighters." Israeli officials who spoke anonymously said Israel wanted to demolish Palestinian buildings close to the border as part of an effort to create a security buffer zone inside Gaza, making it harder for Hamas fighters to carry out cross-border attacks like the ones in southern Israel on the 7th of October. But most of the demolition locations identified by the New York Times in its investigation occurred well outside this so-called buffer zone. And the number of confirmed demolitions based on the availability of visual evidence may represent only a portion of the actual number carried out by Israel since the war began. Now, to carry out these demolitions, soldiers enter the targeted structures to place mines or other explosives and then leave to pull the trigger from a safe distance. In most cases, Israeli troops have cleared and secured surrounding areas. But in areas of active fighting, the demolitions are not without risk. 21 Israeli soldiers were killed last week as their unit prepared to detonate multiple buildings near the border in central Gaza. Palestinian fighters fired a rocket-propelled grenade in their direction, triggering the explosives. That's what the Israeli military later said. In December, a U.S. State Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller, said the creation of a buffer zone along Gaza's roughly 36-mile border with Israel would be a violation of Washington's long-standing position against the reduction of territory in Gaza. And experts on humanitarian law say the demolitions, which would prevent some Palestinians from eventually returning to their homes, could violate rules of war, prohibiting the deliberate destruction of civilian property. In one video of a demolition from late November, a controlled explosion took down at least 4 high-rise residential buildings, just blocks away from a major hospital in Gaza City. Another demolition in December destroyed over a dozen buildings around the city's central Palestine square, which the Israeli military said was home to a large network of tunnels. At least half the buildings in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed since the start of the war, according to satellite analysis estimates. While much of the damage is from airstrikes and fighting, the large controlled demolitions represent some of the single most destructive episodes. In the town of Khuzar, along the buffer zone to the east of Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, videos from early January show soldiers triggering several detonations, destroying nearly 200 homes. Other videos show the soldiers setting off flares and clapping as they carry out a demolition. One of the largest demolitions identified by the New York Times was carried out in Shujaya, a residential neighborhood on the outskirts of Gaza City. Over 3 weeks, scores of homes in the same neighborhood were razed to the ground according to satellite imagery. In some videos, the demolitions appear to be targeting underground infrastructure. Others capture the destruction of mosques, UN-affiliated schools and university buildings, including the demolition of Isra University in mid-January, which drew widespread condemnation after the video circulated online. After US officials raised questions about the decision to demolish the university, the Israeli military said the episode was under review. While the site had been cleared and secured by Israeli ground troops, military officials said it had once served as a Hamas training camp and weapons manufacturing facility, a claim the New York Times says it was unable to verify. Now, observers say the fact that it has previously been used by enemy fighters is not a justification for such destruction. They ask, how can this be the case for a university, a parliament building, a mosque, a school or a hotel in the midst of the Gaza Strip? For Palestinians, the demolitions are yet another symbol of loss and devastation in Gaza, raising questions about the territory's future after decades of displacement and war. Hussam Zomlot, Palestinian ambassador to Britain, says Israel's plan is to destroy Gaza and make it unlivable and lifeless. Israel's goal has always been to make it impossible for our people to return to their land, he says. And staying with news from the Israel-Hamas war, let's now get you an update on the latest US action. US President Joe Biden has approved sanctions on 4 Israeli settlers accused of attacking Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. Biden signed a broad executive order saying violence in the West Bank had reached intolerable levels. The sanctions block the individuals from accessing all US property, assets and the American financial system. Remember, violence in the West Bank has spiked since Hamas launched its unprecedented attack on Israel on the 7th of October. Some 370 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since then, according to the United Nations. The majority of those have been killed by Israeli forces, but at least 8 of them have been killed by Israeli settlers, says the UN. The new executive order means the US government has the power to sanction any foreign nationals who attack, intimidate or seize the property of Palestinians. The sanctions are a first by the US administration, a rare step targeting Israelis, and comes as Biden travels to the state of Michigan, which has a large Arab American population that has been critical of his support for Israel. The Arab American Institute, an advocacy group, earlier said that since the start of the conflict, support amongst Arab Americans for the Democratic Party has plummeted from 59% in 2020 to just 17%. On Thursday, a senior official in the Biden administration said the president had repeatedly raised concerns with Israel about violence by settlers. The executive order sets out the groundwork for how the US will respond to further attacks in the West Bank and is an escalation compared to the visa restrictions that had been imposed on certain individuals last year. In a letter to the US Congress, Biden said the situation in the West Bank, in particular high levels of extremist settler violence, forced displacement of people and villages, and property destruction, has reached intolerable levels and constitutes a serious threat to the peace, security and stability of the region. The initial round of sanctions targeting 4 people are against individuals who have directly perpetrated violence and those who've engaged in repeated acts of intimidation, property destruction, leading to the forced displacement of Palestinian communities. US officials say the executive order is non-discriminatory and applies to both Israelis and Palestinians who direct or take part in violent acts or threats against civilians, intimidation, destroying, seizing property or terrorism. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said the US believes the sanctions will have an impact on these individuals and it expects Israel to do more to hold accountable those responsible for settler violence. Shortly after Biden signed the executive order, Israel signaled its dissatisfaction and described the majority of West Bank settlers as law-abiding people. The response was yet another sign of a deepening public rift between the US and Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Joe Biden are long-term allies, but have disagreed in recent weeks about the idea of creating an independent Palestinian state. The US believes a Palestinian state alongside Israel, known as a two-state solution, is vital for long-term stability in the region. Netanyahu, on the other hand, has repeatedly rejected the idea altogether. The White House acknowledged last month that the US and Israeli governments clearly see things differently. Those comments dampened hopes in some circles that the conflict could result in Israeli and Palestinian leaders restarting diplomatic negotiations and kickstarting the dormant peace process.
The executive order signed by the President of the United States is both disappointing and surprising. You would expect President Biden to look into the facts before signing such an order. As a mayor in Judea and Samaria, I can guarantee that the figures being quoted by the international community are nowhere close to reality. There are a small minority people who do acts of violence that they should definitely be treated by the law enforcement organs of the State of Israel. On the other hand, the facts and figures regarding Palestinian violence are way more severe. It is surprising that the president decided to finger point at the small extreme group of Jews who are acting violently, who are treated by the Israeli law enforcement, and ignoring Palestinian violence, who's been killing thousands of Jews, innocent women, children, and old people in their homes, on their buses, on the way to work or school.
Without betraying too much of our private diplomatic conversations, I will say we have had some very frank conversations with them about extremist settler violence. And that includes some very detailed conversations where we have presented cases to the Israeli government, cases of settler violence where we have seen reports and where we have seen documented settler violence and asked them to take action. And we have seen them take some action. And so we've engaged in a back and forth with them, both at the secretary's level and through our embassy. What we have seen, and I should say, we have seen since those interventions over the past month, 6 weeks, 2 months, we have seen the level of extremist settler violence come down somewhat. Not come down enough. We want to see more. But the interventions that we've made have, we believe, made a difference. But we want to see it continue to come down, which is why we have taken the actions today. With respect to your questions about settlements, we have made clear that we think the expansion of settlements in the West Bank undermine peace, undermine stability, threaten the ultimate establishment of a independent Palestinian state, make it more difficult, and so we will continue to engage with the Israeli government on that matter as well.
Well, time for us to take a quick break here on Global Lens, but don't go anywhere. There's plenty more on the other side, including what the US plans to do in retaliation against the drone attack in Jordan that killed 3 US soldiers.
For the very first time in our investigation, we unmasked the killer of Ravindra Matre.
In 5G, we have to stand with the world, and in 6G, we have to lead the world.
Winning a Grammy was an absolutely surreal experience.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. The US has approved plans for a series of strikes on Iranian targets in Syria and Iraq. That's what media reports suggest. The strikes will take place over a number of days, and weather conditions will likely dictate when they are launched, according to officials who've been quoted. This comes after a drone attack killed 3 US soldiers in Jordan, close to the Syrian border, last Sunday. The US blamed an Iranian-backed militia group for the attack. That group, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, is believed to contain multiple militias that have been armed, funded and trained by Iran's Revolutionary Guards Force, or the IRGC. It has in fact said that it was responsible for Sunday's strike. Iran, meanwhile, has denied any role in the attack, which injured 41 other US troops at the military base known as Tower 22. According to US intelligence, the drone used to attack the facility was manufactured by Iran and is similar to the drones that Iran has been sending to Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. At a news conference on Thursday, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin defended the delayed military response, saying, "We will respond where we choose, when we choose, and how we choose." I think everyone recognizes the challenge associated with making sure that we hold the right people accountable. There is no set formula for doing this. He went on to say there are ways to manage this so it doesn't spiral out of control, and that's been our focus throughout. Officials say the US military could launch the proposed strikes in bad weather but prefer to have better visibility to reduce the risk of inadvertently hitting civilians. President Joe Biden has been under mounting pressure from Republican lawmakers, including some of Washington's most hawkish voices on Iran, to strike targets on Iranian soil. But while the US has repeatedly pledged to respond to Sunday's drone attack, Biden and other defense officials have categorically stated that Washington is not seeking a wider war with Iran or an escalation of tensions in the Middle East. The reportedly approved plans appear to keep the targeting to Iranian targets in Syria and Iraq and not inside Iran. Several Iran-backed groups have increased attacks on US and Israeli-linked entities since the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war on the 7th of October. The Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen, for instance, have attacked ships in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, prompting strikes from the US and its allies. A drone was shot down in the Gulf of Aden while an unmanned sea drone was struck and destroyed in the Red Sea. News agency Reuters has reported that Iran had withdrawn senior officials from Syria following a series of Israeli airstrikes in a bid to avoid being directly drawn into a wider conflict in the region. US officials have also been quoted by the American media as saying that there are signs that the Iranian government is becoming increasingly concerned about the actions of its proxy groups in the region, who have launched over 160 attacks on US forces since last October.
We have said many times, we will not initiate any war. But if anyone wants to bully Iran, we'll respond firmly. Before, whenever the Americans wanted to talk to Iran, like other countries, they said military option is on the table. Now you don't hear all these words anymore. They even say we have no intention of any conflict with Iran. This is the power of our religious people who are always present, which are considered so important for our country. Our armed forces are powerful and are always present.
All right, let's now get you some updates on the American presidential election, which may still be months away, but the contest seems to be already hotting up. With presidential primaries underway and a 2020 general election rematch seemingly the most likely outcome, a new CNN poll shows former President Donald Trump narrowly ahead of President Joe Biden in what's shaping up to be a close contest nationally. This poll highlights voters' conflicted feelings about the leading candidates. Broad majorities of Democrats and Republicans say they would be satisfied if their party's candidate won such a rematch. Still, a sizable minority of voters express a desire for another option if Biden and Trump are the nominees. Overall, 49% of registered voters say they would bank Trump if an election between the two were held today, while 45% support Biden and 5% say they would vote for someone else. Since the polls conducted in fall, the demographic dynamics of the contest appear to be steady, with a wide education gap among the most notable demographic divides and smaller differences by age or race than in other recent presidential elections. Biden's support amongst traditionally Democratic-leaning blocs such as younger voters and voters of color has not grown since the fall. Voters younger than 35 remain about evenly split. 49% back Biden and 46% Trump, while voters of color back 57% Biden to 35% Trump. Most voters on both sides of the hypothetical matchup continue to be more likely to say their choice is about Trump than it is about Biden. 68% of Biden supporters say they would be voting against Trump rather than for Biden, while 60% of Trump supporters say they would be voting more for him than against Biden. A month into the election year, there are few signs of movement in how the public views either candidate. Both Trump and Biden continue to be deeply underwater in favorability ratings. 59% of Americans hold an unfavorable view of Biden and 55% have a negative take on Trump, and many say that Biden does not deserve re-election. That's 66%. Americans largely see Trump's views and policies as too extreme. That's 63%, while most see Biden's views and policies as generally mainstream, about 61%. The poll finds that a victory by either candidate would leave most of the nation dissatisfied and a substantial share of them upset. Voters in the poll were asked whether they would like to see another candidate from within the party that they're closest to run as an independent if Biden were the Democratic nominee and Trump the Republican. Among Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents, 43% say they would want to see another Democrat make an independent bid alongside a Biden-Trump matchup, while 40% of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents say they would want a Republican candidate to run as an independent in that scenario. Polling consistently shows that the idea of a third party or independent candidate for president is popular, but in reality, third-party bids rarely generate as much support as pre-election polling might suggest. The pull of party loyalty comes through in the poll's broad majorities, who say they would be content should their party's likely nominee win. Roughly 8 in 10 GOP-aligned voters say they would be satisfied or enthusiastic with another Trump presidency, and roughly 3/4 of Democratic-aligned voters are similarly positive about a second Biden term. Neither Biden nor Trump has locked in their party's nomination yet. Trump's last remaining major GOP opponent, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, holds a clear lead over Biden amongst voters nationwide in another hypothetical general election scenario. 52% support her compared with 39% for Biden. Voters' choices in that matchup are primarily motivated by views of Biden, with 63% of his supporters saying they back him more than they oppose her, while 63% of her supporters say it's more about opposing Biden than about backing her. Still, many Americans say they don't know enough about Nikki Haley to have an opinion of her. That's 42%. Those who do currently break more negative than positive, 32% unfavorable to 25% favorable. Haley trails Trump by roughly 50 points when Republican and Republican-leaning independent voters are asked who they would most like to see win the GOP nomination for president in 2024. 70% say Trump, 19% Haley, 8% name someone else. While most Democrats see Biden as having a realistic shot at winning a second term, 80% of Democratic-aligned voters say most also see Trump as having a real shot at the White House. 61%, and a narrow majority say that Biden is not the candidate who brings the Democratic Party its best chance to win. In the new poll, 53% of Democratic and Democratic-leaning voters say their party has a better chance to win in 2024 with someone else at the top of the ticket. Democratic concerns about Biden remain concentrated around his age. Nearly half, that's 46%, cite his age when asked to name their biggest concern about him as a presidential candidate, with 5% mentioning his mental competence or sharpness, 2% citing worries about his ability to handle the job, and 2% worrying that he would not live through a second term. About 3% say it's not his age that concerns them personally, but ageism and how his age is perceived by others. And a new concern has emerged about Biden. 5% say his handling of the conflict between Israel and Hamas is their major concern. Democratic-aligned voters younger than 45 are more apt to name this as their top concern than our older voters. Well, so it does look like it could be a very narrow contest between Trump and Biden come November. All right, let's now turn our attention to another story emanating from the US that has an important India connect. The US has approved the sale of 31 armed MQ-9B Sky Guardian drones, missiles and supporting equipment to India for an estimated $4 billion, 7 months after India announced its plan to buy them during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's state visit to Washington, D.C. The Pentagon announced this on Thursday, saying the U.S. Defense Security Cooperation Agency delivered the required certification notifying the Congress of this possible sale. The State Department has made a determination approving a possible foreign military sale to the Government of India of MQ-9B remotely piloted aircraft and related equipment for an estimated cost of $3.99 billion. The Pentagon statement read that this proposed sale will support the foreign policy and national security objectives of the United States by helping to strengthen the US-India strategic partnership and to improve the security of a major defense partner which continues to be an important force for political stability, peace and economic progress in the Indo-Pacific and South Asian region. It will improve India's capability to meet current and future threats by enabling unmanned surveillance and reconnaissance patrols in the sea lanes of operation. India has demonstrated a commitment to modernizing its military and will have no difficulty absorbing these articles and services into its armed forces. That's what the Pentagon statement says. Now, India will buy the MQ-9B armed drones from the US, which will help the Indian military scale up with the fast-changing nature of warfare. Drones and other autonomous systems are increasingly being used in conflict zones around the world. The MQ-9B is a next-generation remotely piloted aircraft that delivers persistent intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance around the globe, according to General Atomics Aeronautical Systems. India will buy 31 MQ-9Bs. Of these, the Navy will get 15 MQ-9B Sea Guardian drones and the Army and the Air Force will get 8 each of the land attack and reconnaissance version called Sky Guardian. The MQ-9B Sky Guardian is the Army and Air Force version. It can fly over the horizon via satellite for up to 40 hours or more in all types of weather and safely integrate into civil airspace, enabling joint forces and civil authorities to deliver real-time situational awareness anywhere in the world, day or night. The MQ-9B Sea Guardian is the maritime-focused sibling of the Sky Guardian. Sea Guardian can also fly over the horizon via satellite for over 30 hours. This versatile maritime patrol and reconnaissance aircraft also has a self-contained anti-submarine warfare mission kit. All right, time for us to take a quick break here on Global Lens, but don't go anywhere. Plenty more on the other side.
वर्ष 2070 तक भारत नेट जीरो का लक्ष्य हासिल करेगा.
There is certainly a wall of capital coming into the clean tech, climate tech space, not just in India but across the world.
This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए और कमाना है तो खरीदिए. जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर. पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है Money9. आजादी पैसे की. अभी डाउनलोड करें.
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
There's a new video around what deepfake can do.
We have seen a trailer of this a few days back.
Rollers should not be only on the platform.
We'll have to wait and see how those play out.
Hindenburg's report cannot be taken as gospel of truth.
Bangalore traffic is an example of something that has gone wrong with our system.
We have more than 50 flyovers in Bangalore city. If flyover is a solution to traffic problem, Bangalore should not have traffic problem.
According to TomTom Traffic Index 2022, Bangalore is ranked as the second worst city in the world when it comes to traffic.
The speed limit at the ORR is 80 kilometers per hour, but our vehicle has only moved 10 kilometers per hour.
What Bangalore needs is a surgery, but what we have been offered repeatedly are band-aids.
Only on the world's first news OTT. News9 Plus, ahead of the curve.
Welcome back. You watching the Friday edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. A former CIA employee has been sentenced to 40 years in prison after carrying out the largest data leak in the agency's history. Joshua Schult, who was accused of handing over reams of classified data to WikiLeaks in 2016, was convicted in 2022 of illegally gathering and transmitting national defense information and obstructing a criminal investigation and grand jury proceedings, amongst other charges. He was also found guilty in 2023 of receiving, possessing and transporting child pornography, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office. He had worked as a computer engineer within the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence and created cyber tools that could grab data undetected from computers. Schult defended himself at trial. An earlier trial ended in a hung jury in 2020. U.S. Attorney Damian Williams said in a statement, Joshua Schult betrayed his country by committing some of the most brazen, heinous crimes of espionage in American history. He caused untold damage to our national security in his quest for revenge against the CIA for its response to Schult's security breaches while employed there. When the FBI caught him, Schult doubled down and tried to cause even more harm to this nation by waging what he described as an information war of publishing top-secret information from behind bars. And all the while, Schult collected thousands upon thousands of videos and images of children being subjected to sickening abuse for his own personal gratification. The FBI said Joshua Schult has been rightly punished not only for his betrayal of our country but for his substantial possession of horrific child pornographic material. The severity of his actions is evident, and the sentence imposed reflects the magnitude of the disturbing and harmful threat posed by his criminal conduct. Schult's issues at the CIA began in the summer of 2015 when he began to feud with management and a co-worker, ultimately filing a restraining order against the co-worker in a state court. Schult and the co-worker were both transferred as a result of the feud. Investigators alleged that Schult became enraged when CIA officials wanted to hire a contractor to build a cyber tool similar to the one that he was building. A year later, investigators said Schult stole cyber tools and source code and transferred them to WikiLeaks. He then tried to cover his tracks, erasing any and all traces of him accessing the computer system. That's what the prosecutors said. Schult quit the CIA in November 2016, but in March 2017, WikiLeaks published the first installment of its Vault 7 leaks, which originated from two programs that Schult had access to. WikiLeaks put out a news release to go with the information, saying that the data had been provided anonymously by a source who wanted to raise policy questions, specifically about whether the CIA had overstepped its hacking capabilities and exceeded its authority. Schult, who also allegedly lied to CIA and FBI investigators to cover his tracks, was arrested in August 2017 on child pornography charges. He was indicted on the charges related to the data breach months later, and now he's been sentenced to 40 years in prison. All right, now here's some heartening news from Greece. When Yolanda Kalanzi and Georgia Ampatzito fell in love 8 years ago, they said the idea of getting married was science fiction in deeply conservative Greece, where LGBTQ couples cannot wed or adopt. Now they have a tentative wedding date for spring tease each other about their ballooning guest list and are already considering outfits and flowers. That's because the Conservative government in Greece submitted a bill in Parliament on Thursday that legalizes same-sex civil marriage. The legislation is expected to pass given the Prime Minister's centre-right party majority and likely support from leftist lawmakers.
When same-sex couple Yolanda Kalansi and Georgia Ampatsidou fell in love 8 years ago, they said the idea of getting married was science fiction. They are from deeply conservative Greece, where LGBT+ couples can neither wed nor adopt. But on Thursday, the government submitted a bill to Parliament that could see same-sex marriage legalised. Kalansi says the couple now consider what wedded bliss would look like.
We couldn't even think about it, imagine it, or dream about it. There was such a fuss being made about it that until we saw the text with our own eyes, we did not dare talk about it. Only when we saw the text of the bill with our own eyes did we slowly start dreaming. In other words, we said immediately, great, how about May? In spring? What will we wear? Will we get flowers?
The legislation is expected to pass given Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis' centre-right party majority and likely support from leftist lawmakers. If it does, it will make Greece one of the first Orthodox Christian countries to adopt such measures and would be a landmark victory for couples like Kalansi and Ampatsidou, who have campaigned for equality. The couple live in Thessaloniki with their 3-year-old son. But under Greece's current rules, only his biological mother, Kalansi, is recognised as a parent by the state. Under the bill, Ampatsidou will be able to adopt him and enjoy equal parental rights once they marry, something that would bring her huge relief.
If something happens to Yolanda, they could take your child from you, from right out of your hands. That is something serious for them to take your child.
Greece's powerful Orthodox Church believes homosexuality is a sin and openly opposes the bill. Bishop Iero Theos says the government's move alters the social cohesion of our country.
It condemns future children to grow up without a mother and a father in an environment of confusion over the role of a parent.
But many in the LGBT+ community believe the new bill does not go far enough. Ampatsidou and Kalansi want to have a second child, but the bill does not help LGBT+ couples in using assisted reproduction methods. The mothers said they have already been turned down twice by IVF centres. Being rejected by the clinic where we had our first child was heartbreaking, Ampatsidou says. The second one was like a stab in the heart. Greece lags behind much of Europe in LGBT rights, and polls show citizens are split on LGBT+ marriage. But over the past decade, the country has recognised cohabitation agreements for same-sex couples and banned conversion therapy for minors, aimed at suppressing a person's sexual orientation.
Now here's another heartwarming story. This one is from Ukraine. A Ukrainian couple who were being held as prisoners of war and feared that they would never see each other again have finally been reunited. Here's how.
This Ukrainian couple thought they might never see each other again. They were both taken as prisoners of war soon after Russia's full-scale invasion 2 years ago.
We had waited for so long to speak, to embrace, to talk. When it happened, we were so happy. We would not wish on anyone the things we had gone through.
Ilya Muzika and Alina Panina have been together since 2019. They met at work, and in 2021, they were posted to Mariupol's busy commercial port as dog handlers, inspecting cargo. When Russia invaded, its forces quickly surrounded Mariupol, razing much of the city and turning it into the deadliest battleground of the conflict. Muzika and Panina took up arms to defend a local factory. Muzika was taken first. Panina ended up at Mariupol's giant Azovstal steelworks, where Ukrainian troops mounted a final stand against the Russians. After Volodymyr Zelensky ordered them to surrender, she too was taken prisoner.
I did not know whether she had been or still was in captivity. I thought...
He thought they shot me dead.
This is the moment they reunited, in the corridor of a Kyiv hospital. Penina was released in October 2022, and Muzica was freed more than a year later in January 2024. Reuters could not independently verify their accounts, and Russia's defense ministry did not respond to a request for comment. Ukrainian authorities estimate around 8,000 Ukrainians, both civilian and military, are being held captive by Russia. Moscow does not provide overall figures on the number of Russians being held in Ukraine.
After a devastating wildfire scorched 365,000 hectares of forest in southern Chile last year, residents are not only rebuilding their lives but also gearing up to better prepare for future catastrophes as climate change heightens the risk. Here's the story.
It took weeks of heroic effort to contain the forest fires that ravaged southern Chile in 2023, with firefighters on the ground and in the air risking their lives to end the devastation. Their task was made more difficult by intense heat and winds brought on by climate change.
We had a combination of high temperatures, more than 40 degrees, wind speeds over 70 kilometers per hour, and humidity below 10%. The fire was advancing at 18 kilometers per hour.
The sheer number of outbreaks meant firefighters were unable to help everyone.
There was no help, no government intervention, no fire brigade, nothing. The area was abandoned, not because of negligence, but because the fire brigade just couldn't cope. There were fires everywhere.
Benjamin lost everything in the fires, but as he held a stable job, he didn't receive any help from the state. Only through the generosity of friends was he able to rebuild his home. It was a similar story for many of his neighbours in Santa Juana. Among them, Maria de la Vega, who had to rebuild her grocery business. After a difficult year, does she feel prepared for the next potential emergency?
If, God forbid, this were to happen again, it would be better to have more time, so that we don't go through the terror of being caught in the flames. We trust that it won't happen again.
Disaster Management Committee has since been set up with the aim of preventing the next devastating incident. New procedures, including fire patrols, have had a positive impact.
Over the final weekend of 2022 to 2023, there were 70 fire outbreaks with more than 4,000 hectares burned. But since then, we've had only 33 fire outbreaks with about 10 hectares burnt. This shows that our patrols are efficient.
Funding has also increased.
From a figure of around $90 million, we are now at more than $160 million. We have also increased by a third the numbers of public firefighters, from 2,000 to 3,300, in addition to the 3,000 private firefighters.
Preventing fires from starting in the first place is key. With temperatures only heading in one direction as a result of climate change, not even the best response could cope with scenes similar to those seen 1 year ago.
Thousands of people trafficked into Myanmar's war-torn east are coerced into perpetrating scams targeting individuals in Europe, the United States and China. This is the dark reality of Asia's cyber slavery. Here's a detailed report.
In this compound on Myanmar's border with Thailand, thousands of people are working to trick people in China, the US and Europe out of their savings. But the people inside aren't doing so for personal profit. They've been trafficked from across the globe and are being forced to work in a scam factory in slave-like conditions.
If there is no client at noon, no lunch. If someone checks and you didn't reply to a client, they beat you or make you stand for hours.
Lucas is part of a group that managed to escape a scam factory known as KK Park. It's one of around 12 such compounds in this area of Myanmar's Karen state, and it's one of the most notorious.
Security was checking our computers, seeing if we are doing our job or playing.
We work 17 hours a day. No complaints, no holidays, no rest. And if we say we want to leave, they tell us they will sell us or kill us.
So they did what they were told: make contact with people on the internet, win their trust, and convince them to invest in fake cryptocurrency sites. Once the victims have sent enough money, the website is shut down and their money gone. This sophisticated form of scamming is called pig butchering, and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime estimates such scams generate more revenue than the drug trade in Southeast Asia. KK Park alone makes tens of millions of euros a month, apparently enabled by soldiers of Myanmar's border guard and on the backs of helpless victims of human trafficking.
Okay, his last message says, "We are in a bunker after the river." What? I don't know what's down the end of that river.
On the Thai side of the border, a team of aid workers is on a mission to help them escape. Timing is critical.
Hello?
Victims are sometimes transferred in taxis to other compounds via Thailand because the roads there are faster and safer. That's when Judah and Michelle act.
We're looking for a taxi with a license plate 95, yellow and blue, coming up on that side of the road.
It's a dangerous mission. They don't know if armed traffickers are in the car.
They turn down a side street. Okay, pull over, pull over, pull over. Reverse into that spot.
This time they're lucky. There are no armed traffickers in sight, there's no opposition from the taxi driver, and Judah and Michelle manage to usher the group into their car.
My name's Judah.
Oh, nice to meet you.
The group are brought to a safe house for a much-needed rest. Their next step will be dealing with immigration authorities.
Not an easy experience. And I hope I can go back to my country and find a job that I was graduated for, to start a new life.
Aaron and Lucas were eventually recognized as victims of human trafficking and repatriated to their home country. But thousands of victims are still trapped at KK Park and other scam factories somewhere on the Myanmar-Thailand border.
Germans were forced to endure yet another day of strikes today as close to 90,000 labourers went on a strike, halting operations at bus and tram stations. Workers say they have no option but to go on a strike as the employers look to increase work hours and cut down on employee benefits. Here's a detailed report.
Germans endured yet another day of strikes on Friday. Bus and tram stations across the country came to a halt as 90,000 transport workers were called on to walk off the job. The 24-hour strike was called by Labour Union Verdi in all federal states except Bavaria. It's the latest in a series of industrial actions that have hit the country's transport sector in recent weeks and disrupted millions of commuters and travellers. Frank Kubler is a bus driver and council member.
The Employers Association unfortunately has presented a counter-demand which we feel is a return to the Middle Ages. They would like a 43-hour work week on a voluntary basis, and they want to abolish the protection against dismissal we are entitled to after 15 years. So we are unfortunately forced to go on strike, otherwise we would not have gone on strike.
Verdi said it had demanded better working conditions. It wants new measures brought in, including reduced working hours and more holiday entitlement. The latest action comes a day after security staff went on strike at 11 German airports. That led to more than 1,000 flight cancellations and affected 200,000 passengers, according to Airports Association ADV. Germany also saw farmer strikes last month, with tractors blocking roads in protest at subsidy cuts.
Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. If you have been, thanks for watching. Have a great weekend ahead.
On October 27, 2023, the world awakened to a new crisis.